video back on. Thank you all so much for that. It's just outstanding. So if you've been listening and watching, please be thinking of questions. You can type them into the Q&A. We already have several there waiting. And I will start working my way through the Q&A feature and directing questions to our speakers. So let's see. The first question is, I'm actually only able to see part of it. 1 second here. Let me see whether I can see the whole thing. We had folks write some wonderfully detailed questions here. All right, first question. Are there examples of exemplary management that Alec mentioned that have happened in Maine? Question from Josie. So anybody at the exemplary forestry initiative, Alec, that you discussed, do you have examples of, are you aware of examples of that happening in Maine, or anyone else on the screen aware of examples happening in Maine? Alec, are you able to turn your audio and video back on?
Oh.
No? Okay. All right.
Well, I don't know exactly to what extent every piece of how exemplary forest is defined. But, places like the lands that are managed by AMC, south of the park, the SFMA practices, a lot of them do hit on that. We don't really, follow it prescriptively, that definition. But I think there's, on our advisor committee, there's a landowner who's certainly practicing exemplary forest on his own property. So being new here, I can't list them off, but certainly there's people practicing good forestry in Maine.
So Aaron, can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks, Alec.
Okay, well, you disabled my video, so I can't turn it on.
Oh, sorry. We'll try to fix that.
Anyway, so yes, that answer is correct. There are people who are practicing extraordinarily good forestry. So for example, the Wikipe Woods that I referenced earlier, which was managed by Ron Locke and now is managed by Bob Seymour, it is clearly practicing. Okay, I still get the video. Well, there I am. All right. And the Appalachian Mountain Club is doing a very good job of restoring forest that was pretty well hammered earlier. The Nature Conservancy is doing a good job. The Bureau of Parks and Lands, which now has stocking, which is considerably above the average for Maine and for northwestern Maine, is also doing good work. So there are people who are practicing very good forestry. Are they all calling it exemplary forestry? No. We're just trying to brand a particular approach to forestry that we can then help to advocate to get more folks involved. I would point out that we have secured a $30 million grant from the USDA to fund people to practice better forestry. And we're hoping to actually we're working on designing a program that would have enduring funding that would enable us to pay people to practice better forestry. And going back to what I said in the talk, the key to this is really, you got to make this something that is financially feasible for people. You can't expect them to spend money that isn't going to yield a return. And that, unfortunately, has been the circumstance here in Maine.
Thanks, Alec. All right, next question is, please tell us more about herbicide use in the SFMA.
So I can start and have Shane add in. We have used herbicides very very few times in the SFMA just to deal with some small patches of invasive plants. And Shane is working on a policy for the use of herbicides as part of silviculture.
Can I?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, let me just jump in, Shane, so to give you a little cover on this, okay? And that is, people don't realize that the National Park Service uses herbicides. The Nature Conservancy uses herbicides. They don't publicize this, but it is virtually the only way to deal with certain issues. For example, if you have some of the invasive species, such as particularly bittersweet, which if it gets loose in a stand can really wreak havoc and be extremely difficult to get rid of. It's almost the only way to deal with it. And there are other beneficial uses of herbicides which may be applied once in a 50 or 60 year rotation of forests that they can shorten the period of recovery for getting a forest back to where it ought to be by close to a century. And so there are benefits, and a lot of people that you would not think are using herbicides, in fact, are.
Jane, did you want to add to that one?
What was that?
Do you want to add anything on that question?
Honestly, couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, we're you know, like Nava said, we're setting up a policy that involves a rigorous assessment, and but yeah, basically couldn't have said it better myself.
Great. All right, thanks, Jane.
I get paid to be provocative.
Next question appears as though it got cut off, and I only am getting the first half of it, but it addresses, it asks about the various sustainability certifications like FSC and SFI certifications, and whether they incorporate the balance between, and then I'm not sure what comes after that. So if you could just speak a little bit about those external certification systems and the way the park has approached that. Then I'll see if I can figure out what the person who asked the question was looking for.
Jensen, do you want to say anything, having been the first through?
I can. Back when this became a tool that people talked about as far as validating good forest management, certifying good forest management, perhaps encouraging good forest management, there were two certification bodies kind of vying for people's attention. One was SFI, and for the life of me, I can't remember the other one. What was it, Alec?
FSC.
FSC. So FSC was looked at as being a little more extreme, a little more rigorous, especially in the field examination of what you did. So we embarked on FSC certification and achieved it. And we found that for a year, there was, you get certification. There are a lot of hoops to run through, and a fair amount of cost in having what you could say is a stamp of certification that you are a sustainable forest. We were very proud of that, and we found that the certification and stamp, however, had limited real effect for us. We did benefit from the regular, I don't think they're every year, but they're every few years, visits to the forest and examinations, and a repartee with the auditors about how you were doing, and a reminder of all the facets of sustainable forest management. But that was somewhat of an exercise in diminishing returns. So after a while, we were paying a lot of money for the audits, but not getting a lot out of them, paying still more for the certification. but we couldn't point to a finger, point a finger at a benefit for that. So we decided that we would just go on the merits of practicing the best forestry we could, which had been very good so far, and we let that lapse.
Thanks, Jensen. I'm going to turn on Ginger's audio, who posed that question, so she can fill in the blanks for us. All right, Ginger. So
yeah, so I was just wondering if those existing certifications, that's very helpful that you told me that you tried it, but it didn't result in market value for you. But I was wondering if those systems have gotten to the point where they incorporate the balance between sustainability and climate change sequestration. But maybe that's no longer a question because you don't do that anymore.
I think if we were to do it, it probably the current certifications might talk more specifically about that in the audit requirements and what you think about as far as sustainability. That's a very good question. This was probably, I'm going to say 10 or 15 years ago that we got certified, ran it for 5 or 10 years, and then after a lot of discussion, somewhat soul-wrenching discussion, decided to let it lapse. It's a little bit harder if you're just a forest manager. If you're integrated and you have wood products that come from your forest, it makes a lot more sense to carry this forward. And there's a lot more opportunity for market value than there is if you're just a forest in Western Maine trying to sell some wood to various people.
And the other thing is, more of a comment. I used to be very involved with an organization that worked on reducing toxic chemicals in consumer products. And on the other end of that organization, they were really working on building more bio-based started out with potatoes and wood. And when I asked them, there was some international interest in Maine for the bio-based plastics. And I asked them, well, Maine still grows wood slower than the South. Why are they looking at Maine for that? And the answer that I was told is that because so many of the Maine forests have gone through these sustainable certifications, and that sort of added to those environmental values. I'm not suggesting you go back to that, but I just found that very interesting.
And if I could just also add that some of the data that we still collect to this day in the park originated as part of requirements for that early certification. So we have kept pieces that are useful to us or helpful to our partners. So for instance, the air and water quality probes that we use, those data are useful to us and they go into a larger database. The USGS houses and analyzes for instance, for brook trout habitat. And so, and it's a watershed based model. So we have kept some of the practices from that, but we just, don't try to get credit for them.
Yeah, thank you.
Maine does have a very high percentage of forest land by comparison with other states, which is certified, either SFI or FSC. A lot of people have had the same kind of experience that Jensen talked about, that there really wasn't any financial reward. Sometimes there is a reward for having access to markets, that if you're FSC or SFI, you have an easier time selling your product. And my understanding is that currently these certification systems are working on trying to integrate climate considerations into their programs, but I don't believe that they're all the way there yet.
Thanks, Alec.
I'll add briefly that one of the best ideas we had that came out of this, and this was a joint idea, I know it wasn't mine alone, but the audit requirements for sustainability, like for an organization like SFI, are very detailed and quite broad and cover all the aspects of forest management, just not timber, but everything else. And one of the ideas that came out of our auditing experience was to build our management plan on the same hierarchy that the audit standards were. It made perfect sense, and it really helped us drive management forward. And that first audit that we had that took about 3 days of tromping all over the SFMA and looking at stands and answering questions about why we did this or why we didn't do that was one of the best forestry experiences I've ever had.
Thanks, Jensen. That was a great question, Ginger. Thanks again. So next question comes from Bill Wood, and that's maybe some ecologically oriented builders might pay a premium for SFMA sourced lumber. I know I've heard from some folks on this call about products that do fetch a premium from the SFMA. Maybe you can talk, any of you want to reflect on products that come out of the SFMA that fetch a premium based on the park's management, reputation, stature, any of the above.
Well, I'm
Well,
not a, go ahead, Jensen.
I'll just very briefly interject that the most high value product we ever sold from the SFMA came out of a series of very large spruce logs that we cut into 10-foot bolts, and we reached out to the tone wood industry, which is one of these little cultures that exists in our country that look for top wood out of old growth red spruce for guitars and piano structures and all kinds of instruments. There's a certain structure that results in a certain tone that they are very attracted to, and it's not very typical, and it is becoming increasingly hard to find. And I got this idea originally from my Germany trip, where they were marketing Spessart oak in this fashion, where they cut it in 3-meter blocks and put it up on blocks and then had people come and bid on it. We did the same thing in the yard and at headquarters, and people cut this stuff into 2-foot blocks and bought it in that format. And I think the prices we were getting were something like around $2,000 1,000 board feet if you did the math for that, but it's very rare.
And we still have sometimes like a very high-end piece of wood, like a bird's eye maple recently. I think the biggest challenge with that is unless there's a buyer or you set up something like what Jensen described, someone has to identify that that's a special piece of wood. And I think much to Shane's chagrin, he is not there every day in the SFMA watching that. And so it really depends, like this bird's eye maple we just sold this year. Our harvester who cuts wood by hand recognized it and, marked it as such. But one of our goals is to make sure that our wood is sorted a little bit more carefully than it has been in recent years, because we're losing a lot of value by, wood going to pulp, or even, some of our softwood that's going to firewood. That's not the highest and best use. If it's a really good piece of cedar, we could build lean-tos from it, or bog bridges, or something that is a better value for us in the park.
Thanks, Nava. Next question is, there has been mention of spruce budworm. Are there other invasives that the park is concerned about? Yes.
So at the park generally, and I'm not sure that we would completely separate the SFMA from it, but all of the invasive pests that are sort of creeping our way, emerald ash borer, there's various insects impacting pine, larch, maple. Those to us are the most concerning. I'm, also, we're pretty fortunate as far as invasive plants in the park, but it's sort of a matter of time until we have more of them. And actually, Aaron and friends of Baxter have been really helpful with helping us set priorities and what to watch out for. But yes, there are many more than I would like there to be for us to be looking at or watching out for.
Thanks, Nava. All right, next question is, what policy can you institute to show the general public what good silviculture can look like? So maybe you could talk a little bit about the kiosk and just some of the resources in the SFMA, or what the park has done to share that info with the public, if you'd like to.
Yeah, so there's a forestry interpretive trail, which is kind of on both sides of the park tote road, actually, where the SFMA reaches the tote road. It's in need of an update. Along with our staff turnover in the SFMA, we've had some turnover in our interpretive staff. So we're playing a bit of catch up on that, but we're looking at that trail. It's a lovely, short, pretty level trail that people can take with a self-guided book that describes forest ecology at different stations. Again, I said our demonstration efforts, we've been sort of reactive for a while and just, giving tours when someone asks, but we will, once we get sort of caught up from all these transitions, we hope to be on a more regular schedule with tours that actually show our silvicultural practices on the ground. We do have teachers tours that come, and yeah, just different, the partners that we work with are always looking for sites to tour, so I'm sure we're in their crosshairs for a tour soon. And I don't know, maybe Jensen can talk about what we had done in the past, since like I said, we are just kind of restarting those efforts now.
It sounds to me like you're just carrying the ball forward. What you're talking about, Nava, is very similar to what we did. There were always people that were interested, and it was always good to talk with them and have. So we had a certain number of groups come every year to look at what we were doing.
And I think, trying to get interns working with us in the summers again is another kind of teaching opportunity, much more one-on-one kind of thing, but very effective.
Thanks, Nava. All right, we have time, I think, for one or two more questions. The next one relates to old growth. And it says, Eben once told me of a couple of old growth stands in the untrailed portions of the non-SFMA park, but these don't seem to be well known. Can you speak a little bit about maybe old growth areas or mature stands, ecological reserve type stands in the SFMA? And then if you want to address others elsewhere in the park, and just speak about that a little bit. Anybody? I've been to some of them. I'm not the best person here, though.
What's that?
Oh, I said I've been to a few of them, but I'm not the best person to answer this. So yeah, Shane.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the old growth within the non-SFMA park. Within the SFMA, we have there's the Booty Bog Natural Area, which is a ecological reserve. And we also have Frost Pond Forest, which is under active management, but it's very limited management. That's one of the locations. Well, that is the location where the Tonewood sale came from. But yeah, I'm not the right person to ask for old growth forest outside of the SFMA, though, to be honest. But we do have a lot of older, very mature forests throughout the SFMA. Within our reserves, within our operational management, those are the ones that are recognized as old growth. So actually, I think Webster Ledge might be as well.
The way I've come to think about this, in Frost Pond, we somewhat quietly took the idea that we'll have very limited management, but we will actually try to manage to maintain the forest as an older strata forest, a later successional, generally later successional. It's hard to do, and I'm not. I don't think that I fully understand it, but they're rare in Maine for sure. What I've always taken great heart in is if you look at the forests in general in the park, and there are areas that are along Nassau Stream from Nassau Campground up to the start of Double Top Trail. There's a large area of mixed hardwood in there that's very late successional. There's a little skip on the Russell Pond Trail between South Branch and Russell Pond that the fire didn't catch. That's obviously later successional. There are some high elevation areas in the park that were missed by fires. The top of East Turner has a nice section of very late successional softwood on a strip that wasn't reached by the fire. They're scattered throughout the park, but what I always took heart in is that the park is such that it's not going to change. The management of this place will never change. So right now we have what I would call relatively mature forest in general in the park. Sometimes less than that when cutting rates were exercised, but in a lot of the park, the last cutting that took place might have been 100 years ago. It might have been followed by a fire, but it was a long time ago. The forests aren't old, but they're getting there. Every year they get closer. And eventually the park will be the largest reservoir of old growth forest in the state of Maine. There's little to prevent that right now from happening.
And Jensen mentioned the high elevation forest. When people ask me about old growth, I always take the opportunity to point out that there's these stunted trees right where, you transition into the alpine ecosystems at the higher elevations. And some of those can be extremely old, even though they look like little Christmas trees. They have extremely small growth rings, but some of them have been there a long time. So not what you would typically, what most people would typically recognize as mature forest, but it's very much so.
Thanks. Thank you all. And Bill, if you're interested in reading more about this, almost 45 years ago now, survey done by what was then called the Critical Areas Program of late successional or old growth stands in the state that does cover some stands in the park. So if you're interested in reading more about those stands, some of the oldest red spruce documented anywhere in Maine and really anywhere in the world popped up in that survey. So there's some pretty cool information in there. Happy to connect you with my copy if you'd like a copy of it. Just reach out. All right, I think we have one more question, and that is, can anyone buy wood from the park? Say if someone was interested in timber for boat building, or do you only sell in large quantities?
We don't have any rules against, or any guidelines. The bottom line is it has to work for us. We've had small sales that were easy and made sense fiscally, and we've had ones that if it turns into a headache and the person doesn't come pick up the wood, and then it's if it becomes so we're spending so much time on it that it takes away from the financial benefit, then we don't. But I think for specialty woods, we're open to suggestions.
If the park had stands of white oak, I think you already would have been approached by folks. There's the few species, and I'm not sure which species the person who asked that question was interested in, but I know boat builders are always in looking for certain species.
Well, we're not quite into white oak yet, but give it another, what, 30 years? 50?
Yeah. Yep. Wait a few decades. Yeah. All right. Let me check and see if there are any more questions. If you have a question on your mind, please, now is your chance to ask it. Otherwise, we will wrap up. And I'm not seeing any other questions. So I want to say a huge thank you to Alec, Jensen, Nava, and Shane for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us tonight. That was absolutely outstanding. So really appreciate the time and energy that you put into preparation and sharing all of your knowledge with us this evening. We did record the sessions tonight, and we will have these the recordings posted on our Friends of Baxter website and YouTube channel shortly. And we will likely split them up where you can see the whole video, or split them up by presenter, so you can watch this as 3 or 4 shorter videos. So if you know folks who would be interested in seeing those, please share them widely. We should have them up soon. And I want to reiterate that we are running an in-person tour of the SFMA on Friday, October 27th. This is a fairly unusual opportunity. I think the last time Friends of Baxter hosted a tour like this was almost a decade ago in 2014. And that will be that tour will be led by some of the folks on the screen right now, and some others as well. And it'll be an outstanding opportunity to visit many of the stands that are receiving just outstanding silviculture and attention from park staff, and to be able to see much of what you just heard about in action out on the landscape. So Friday, October 27th, it is rapidly filling if it's not full already. So please reach out to Rachel at friendsofbaxter.org if you're interested in registering or getting on the wait list for that program. All right, and Mary just posted the link in the chat where we will have the recordings posted. We've recently set up a new dedicated page on our website for the SFMA, and Friends of Baxter as an organization is really trying to shine a light this year on that very special and underappreciated part of the park. And this session tonight is part of that effort. You can also check out an article coming up on our newsletter next issue about the SFMA and the session in late October. So thank you all so much for attending. We're past time here, so we will call it a night. And thank you so much to our presenters for your expertise, and thanks everyone for coming. Take care and have a great evening.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.